Hello, everyone, and welcome to your next episode of MHEDA Talks. I'm your host, Shari Altergott, Chief Experience Officer of the CX Edge. Well, I have a special guest with me today. You guys might have seen him before, Alex Chausovsky. He has been on the MHEDA stage a number of times. He's also the Director of Analytics and Consulting for the Bundy Group. Welcome so much, Alex. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, Shari. Thanks so much for having me.
As I said, some people might have seen you before. You've been a part of a number of different MHEDA events, but maybe for some people that aren't familiar as much with you, could you give us a little bit of background on just a little bit more about yourself and how you got started in the world of analytics and consulting?
Absolutely. Yeah, the point of my entire career really has been to help business leaders and decision makers be data-driven in the key operational and strategic decision making that they get involved in. And I leverage all sorts of economic data, labor market data, anything related to geopolitics, M&A, to help keep them informed about what's going on in the world. And then most importantly, to translate that information into practical and actionable advice that they can actually implement in their business. So my career has spanned everything from business intelligence and market research. I worked for ITR Economics for 6 years as a macroeconomic speaker and consultant. I then started a consulting practice for a recruiting firm and worked in the labor market for a few years. And now with the Bundy Group, I'm part of a boutique investment bank that helps people with, capital raises, business sales, acquisitions, and everything related to M&A. So all of it is coming back to this idea of how can I help a company make better decisions and have better performance, leveraging the data, the huge amount of data that exists out there.
Well, I have to imagine that now is a great time to be in the world of data. I would love to have another podcast eventually that we just talk about the evolution of people using data to make business decisions. I mean, it seems so logical, but it really wasn't there to the level that it is today, 20 years ago. I grew up on the marketing and sales side of the business. And to be honest, I was never a data person. That wasn't something that was really in my wheelhouse. But now from a marketing function, we rely on data so much to make every single decision. So we're so glad to have you with us today. You touched on a little bit the labor, that you've done a lot of work on the labor side. That's where we're going to focus our discussion today, because I think so many people are concerned about what the labor market looks like, how to prepare their business appropriately for not only today, but for the future. So I was hoping we could kind of just kick it off with kind of a broad perspective of what the labor market looks like today and what we can kind of expect throughout the rest of the year.
Absolutely. So in order for me to talk about where we are today, I think it's important to set a little bit of context of the massive amount of change that we've gone through in just the last few years, particularly since the pandemic, the evolution of the labor market, both from a changing demographic makeup and the retirement of the baby boomers and the impact that that's having, and changing preferences and priorities and tendencies as a result of the pandemic and all of the thinking that people had a chance to do about their careers. Is this what I'm really passionate about? Do I see a long-term future for myself in this field? Or maybe do I want to try my hand at starting my own business and doing something totally different? So it's been a remarkable journey, and where we find ourselves today is very different than where we were before or during the pandemic. So some context. Pre-pandemic, if you look at the healthy labor market, you're talking about unemployment somewhere in the 3.5% to 4.5% range. You're talking about monthly job additions somewhere in the 150 to 180,000 jobs added every month. And of course, when the pandemic started and we shut down the economy in the second quarter of 2020, all of that ground to a halt. Companies were terrified. They didn't know what the future held. And so many of them laid a bunch of people off. Others chose a different path, and they committed to keeping their folks on, but maybe lowering the amount of hours that they were working or asking them to take a temporary pay cut. And then as the economy started to open back up, as we started to understand the virus more, as we started to get some vaccinations in place and really allow ourselves back into a state of normalcy, we saw the labor market absolutely take off. The huge amount of demand, both for consumer and industrial goods, meant that most businesses couldn't keep up with the level of demand side pull that they had. And so everybody started to scramble and try to hire as many people as possible. And that was happening at a time when unemployment was already fairly low. So the gap between the amount of available labor and the amount of labor that was necessary to fill all of the open positions grew exponentially. At some point in early 2022, there were 12 million open jobs in the United States and only about 5 million people actively looking for work. So a difference of 7 million, not enough bodies to fill all of the work that is out there. Now, that has since cooled. So over the course of 23 and now halfway through 2024, we've definitely seen the pendulum swing from very much a candidate-dominated market where people can basically name their price to more of a balanced market that we have today. So we're now here in June of 2024. We're sitting at a market that has still an imbalance. There are still more jobs than there are people, but that delta, the difference, is now only about 1.5 million people, not 5 million people. So the pendulum is swinging back towards the middle. The number of additions that we're seeing month to month has also tempered. So over the course of 21 and 22, on average, we added somewhere between 300 and 350,000 jobs every single month. Now, with the latest month of data, we're down to about 200,000. And even that still, remember, by pre-pandemic terms, a very, very good performance. So I think that the conclusion that I come to is the labor market is moderating. It's no longer at the fervor that it was in 21 and 22. Some of the excesses, the crazy offers, the people moving jobs for 30, 40, 50% more pay, that those days are behind us. And people are valuing a little bit more consistency and stability. So quits are also down. The great resignation is in the rear view mirror. People are not nearly as likely to quit their job to jump ship somewhere else as they were 12 to 18 months ago. So we're entering this period of normalcy in the labor market, which means a few things. Number one, it means that companies should have a slightly easier time finding people for the open positions they have. Number two, they should have a slightly easier time retaining the folks that they have because they're not likely to quit as much as they were over the last few years. But at the same time, I still think that the favor is leaning towards the candidate, and companies do need to be really good at both attracting new talent to their organizations and keeping the folks that they have. And that requires a lot of different strategies related to compensation, work-life balance, benefits. And the people that are doing this well really have risen head and shoulders above the rest. And the people that are not doing this well, the companies that are not doing this well, are clearly kind of lagging behind. And it's very easy to tell who's who. So that's where we stand today. As I look out to the future, I think that, an individual's experience is really different depending on what you do. So the overall unemployment rate right now is around 4%, but the vast majority of the jobs that we're seeing added are concentrated in healthcare, government, and leisure and hospitality. So, the other positions, people are having a hard time finding work, and sometimes their job search process is taking a long time, right? So the devil's in the detail, right? There's an important way to look at the data. I come back to the data, right? And realize that, the unemployment rate for overall labor might be 4%, but unemployment for management positions is just north of 2%. Unemployment rate for engineers is below 2%. Unemployment rate for accountants is low. So my advice to companies in thinking about this labor market is don't try to put a template on it. Really understand the nuances and the differences specific to your industry and the roles that you're trying to fill, and then move forward with a cohesive strategy from there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that overview. And I think we've seen a lot of that, and especially in this industry. One of the places people are having the hardest time finding candidates is technicians, service technicians, and engineers, as you said, is below 1%. I haven't seen an unemployed engineer in a very long time. So right. that all tracks with really what we're seeing. One of the other things that I hear come up a lot, especially within the supply chain, is this fear of automation taking jobs, that there will be no jobs because these facilities are highly automated. And based on what you just said, there's a gap between the number of people looking for jobs and the number of jobs available, that to me would speak automatically to the need of automation. Not only from a cost saving perspective, but just from a people perspective. If there's not going to be enough people to fill these jobs, we have to supplement it through automation. What have you seen on that kind of automation side and that fear? Is it founded in any data, in any reality?
I think that anytime that there's technological advancement happening, and it could be automation, it could be computing, it could be AI, many people are talking about the impact that that's going to have on labor moving forward. We tend to fall victim to the anxieties that we share, that automation is coming for everybody's jobs. We have a lot of data that really refutes that notion that automation is a tool that companies at this point must rely on to supplement the shortage of labor that we're all facing. And automation, by and large, goes in to take care of the jobs that are repetitive and mundane and that very few people want to do in the first place, right? So when you're talking about production line work, which is physically intensive and grueling and wears you down over time, that's where we're seeing most of the automation solutions be implemented right now. Lifting of heavy objects, repetitive motions, things like that. I would say that automation should be viewed as an opportunity. So a little bit of perspective here. We really peaked when it comes to manufacturing somewhere around kind of 20 million jobs back in the 80s. And then over the course of the 90s and the early 2000s, those numbers went down quite substantially. But since then, we've seen a rebound and we've seen some manufacturing jobs come back, but they're different types of manufacturing jobs than we had before. You're not building Fords on an assembly line, right? You're working with much higher tech products and you're doing a lot of more value add than just the physical labor. So I think that automation is a great vehicle for companies to overcome the challenges posed by labor, and it should not be viewed as a threat. The automation solutions that are being most successfully implemented right now are, again, for those applications and those tasks that labor has a choice of either going into typical manufacturing versus an Amazon warehouse versus scheduling medical appointments for people from the couch of their home. And those are not competitive with one another. And so I think automation is a part of the solution. It is certainly not a replacement to labor.
I couldn't agree more. So thank you for that. You kind of mentioned, what we went through, obviously, with COVID and in 2020, 2021. The material handling industry is not an industry that historically had remote workers. It really was an industry built on people coming into an office, that 9 to 5, technicians out on the road, salespeople on the road. Obviously, the businesses had to make huge adjustments through COVID. And now I've seen some kind of go back to what it was like pre-COVID. Some are now in a hybrid, and there's all different variations in today's working world of material handling. What impact have you seen remote work have on the labor market?
Yeah, so remote work has been one of the biggest game changers, I think, since the pandemic came around. Whereas this notion that, if we allow people to work remotely, especially for positions that lend themselves well to that type of job, we're going to lose productivity, or we're going to have people kind of blow off their work and not do what they're supposed to be doing. There is absolutely no evidence of that happening. If you're an accountant, you can do your job just as easily from your home office as you can from the company office. Now, what I have seen is that some of the more demanding positions that really have no option but to be in person, there's a lot more kind of requirements coming back to bring people in to the location, the physical office space. But I think overall, what I've observed is a stratification of the labor market. I would say about 55 to 60% of all work, and this is backed by data, is now back in person full time. Another 25 to 30% is hybrid, as you alluded to. So you're working 2 to 3 days in the office, 2 to 3 days from home or remotely. And then the remainder, 15 to 20%, is fully remote. So these are programming jobs. These are other jobs that you don't have to be in a physical office. I think key to understanding this is that, again, even at the company level, you can't really apply a template. because you're going to have different roles that require different solutions. And you really have to figure out what works for you as an individual company. Now, there is a part to managing this process, because the people that have to be there in person, you don't want them to be resentful of the privileges that people that work remotely have. And so you've got to find some ways to compensate for that, perhaps allowing for some flexibility of schedule, maybe a few days of additional PTO that you can give them, maybe even off the books without changing the official PTO policy. But you've got to understand that flexibility is a very key component of being successful in this labor market. Listening to the input of what your people are telling you they need, and then being responsive to that as much as you can, right? There's some realities that businesses face. For example, if somebody comes to you and says, I feel like I'm being undercompensated and therefore I need a raise, the answer shouldn't be, well, this is what we've always paid people, so take it or leave it. The answer should be, let me do my research. Let me go back and find out what a competitive wage is for your position based on your experience and the other criteria that you bring to the table. And then we can have a conversation about that, right? And if you find out that they're not getting paid a competitive market wage, you can say, let's put together a plan for how we can get you there over time. In the meantime, what else can we give you? What else can we accommodate, whether it's flexibility of schedule, maybe some of that extra PTO, that will bridge that gap. So the big notion I think that I'm trying to communicate here is the old mentality of I'm the employer, you're the employee, and there's this power down projection doesn't work anymore. It's a partnership, right? I, as a company, will tell you what I need from you as an employee to achieve my goals, but then you also get to tell me what you need from me, and I will listen and try to accommodate. Those partnerships work so much better in today's labor market than the traditional kind of power down projection. And so I hope that people listening to this conversation ask themselves and take a hard look in the mirror and say, do we have a partnership with our employees, or are we just the boss to the employee relationship? I think that's a really key part.
I totally agree. And I think it's not a one size fits all, as you said. Different people have different needs, and different positions have different needs. And I think it's figuring out what those are, that it's not a blanket approach anymore. Like I think it really used to be. I think there was a company policy. This was a policy, everybody adheres to it, or you can find another place to work. And that's just not the environment anymore. When I started in this industry, a few years after I started, the conversation was about millennials, and the millennials are coming into the workforce, and they were almost treated as this alien sort of generation of what do we do with millennials? Now it's Generation Z and coming into the workforce and how to manage them and how is it different than millennials. But there's also a lot of conversation around not as many people of the Z generation really participating in the labor market. Is that something that you're seeing, or is that really just a made-up thing that people are talking about?
Well, I would say that if you look at the labor market participation rate, especially for prime working age population, which includes not only the millennials and Gen Zs, but also Gen Xers like myself and the boomers as well, it's actually very close to a record high right now. So the overall labor force participation is high. I think that the younger folks are participating. They're just doing it in a slightly different way than many others. They're much more focused on the gig economy. They're much more focused on things that they are passionate about, rather than just like the paycheck to paycheck lifestyle that I think some Gen Xers and some of the older generations are more comfortable with, or more used to, I should say, right? So they are big advocates for doing something that makes a difference. And I think that a key part of getting them involved and excited about working in manufacturing or in material handling specifically is telling the message of the industry as not one that is an old, boring, mature dinosaur, right? But one that's exciting and has a lot of prospects for not only growth, but making people's lives better. Like we're really going to be making a difference in the quality of life for folks by doing the job that we do. I think another key element of the conversation, particularly when it comes to the younger generations, is, what do we do that goes beyond just making money, right? Yes, of course, we're here to make a profit, but is there philanthropic activities that we get involved in? Is there community engagement that we do? What is the mission of the company that is beyond the bottom line, right? If you can focus on those things, that tends to resonate a lot with young folks. And if you invest in their development, they also get much more bought into the notion of, being a more traditional employee for you. But it does take listening. It takes emotional sensitivity, EQ and IQ in terms of dealing with them. It takes a recognition that you can't just do business the way that you've always done, that you have to evolve the company. There's, mental health issues to consider. There's, environmental issues to consider. There's DEI issues to consider. And I think that oftentimes, particularly the older generations, the folks that have been in business for 30 years, they're quick to dismiss that as being just like, inconsequential and just too difficult to cope with. But what I can say is companies that take the time to actually say, no, we want to evolve, we want to continue to be attractive to younger talent, and they actually invest time and resources into doing that, they do see a very positive feedback loop from that and a good ROI on their investment. So I think it's really important, particularly as you see, Gen Alpha coming up after the Zers, and as management transitions from the boomers to then Gen Xers to millennials, I think that companies will adapt to this evolving landscape from a generational perspective, because otherwise, again, you're just kind of throwing your hands up and saying, well, I'm just going to keep doing things the way I've always done, which doesn't work.
Agreed. So we've touched on a few different ways in talking about talent, of how people can attract talent, but I kind of want to wrap it in a little bit of a bow and talk about the key elements of building a talent strategy. So I think, especially in this industry, everybody's always recognized the importance of talent, but I would say that there wasn't as much of a strategy around it. It was, we have a job opening, let's fill that job opening, do some interviews. Now companies are moving to a really much more strategic element of building a pipeline of talent and building a strategy. So from your perspective, what are some of those key elements that you want to make sure you include in a talent strategy?
So I would start at the very top. And by that, I mean, you've got to have senior management involved in not only crafting that strategy, but continuously refining it. So if your company just delegates all of that work to the HR department, and you've got an HR department of 2 or 3 people, I can tell you they're overwhelmed. They do not have the capacity to do all the things that need to be done. Also, they don't control the budget. At the end of the day, when you identify gaps or shortcomings in your strategic approach to talent, it often requires deployment of resources, right? Whether it's money or people's time or focus. It's the senior management team that has the ability to pull those levers and actually get effort and resources where they need to be. So I would say key is involvement of the owner, CEO, CFO, ops manager, and HR's got to have a seat at the table when you're doing your strategic planning, right? When you're talking about growth targets for revenue or profit margin, what kind of headcount is that going to take? Does HR think that we are in a viable position to provide that level of employment, right? And the feedback on the data side, HR has some amazing insights into what's working and what's not, but oftentimes those just live in the HR department. And that information needs to be fed up the chain of command to the decision makers so that they can leverage to pull the levers that need to be pulled. So that's the overarching theme, is it's not just an HR function. This has got to be done at the senior management level. The other component here is looking at the 3 pillars of talent strategy, which is attracting people to your organization, or basically answering the question, why would somebody want to come and work for our company? Then there's the hiring process itself and getting people through that and through the onboarding procedures. And then there's the retention components, right? And so in each one of those areas, there are key opportunities to do things differently and better than you've done before. A couple of examples. So on the attracting side, okay, one of the things that I really was impressed with when I was working at the recruiting company is that every candidate that came through the door was asked to fill out something called a CLAMPS profile. CLAMPS is an acronym that stands for Challenge, Location, Advancement, Money, People, and Security. And you're basically asking a person to list in order of priority, 1 through 6, which one of these things do they find the most important. And then you're able to use that input in the interview to talk to the things that that person cares passionately about. And so you're projecting this idea of alignment between the company and what that individual prioritizes, and that hugely increases the likelihood that they will accept a job offer if you were to give them one, rather than just going through the traditional repetitive rigmarole, all of the interview questions that you ask every single candidate in the same exact way. So it's an example like that that I think people really need to see, wow, that doesn't cost a whole lot of money to implement, and yet it can have a huge impact on my performance in terms of attraction. When it comes to the hiring part, I think key elements are you've got to compress that process. You've got to be quicker to pull the trigger. You know, we all know a candidate if they're a good fit or not within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that conversation, right? And yet we still see companies putting folks through 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews. That doesn't work anymore. People lose interest very quickly. They feel like their time is being wasted, and so they move on. And then communication is the other component. I think it's absolutely key to have a touch point with your candidates on a regularly occurring basis, and that basis has to be probably 3 to 5 days. So when I say touch point, I mean an email, a text message, a LinkedIn message, a voicemail, something that you say, hey, we're still going through the process here. We're very much interested in you, just kind of bear with us a little bit. It's when a candidate doesn't hear from a company for 3 or 4 weeks that they start to drift and lose interest once again. So those are some examples on the hiring side. And then when it comes to retention, we already talked about the importance of listening to people. And there are some really, really good tools that help you do that. For example, one of the tools I've seen that's very effective is called the Gallup Q12 survey. It's not something that I run myself, but it is available through Gallup. It's 12 statements that you're asking people to agree or disagree with. And the statements are things like, I have a best friend at work. I get to do what I do best every day. The people that I work with do quality work. My objectives and the expectations the company have for me are clearly laid out. And if you see people agreeing with that, then that's a great input that you're doing things the right way. But if you have disagreement with those statements, then it's very much a sign that you need to put some work in. So I think that survey costs something like $20 a head to run. And you just do it once every 6 months, once every year, whatever cadence is a good fit for your organization. But then you get that input. It's anonymized, so people are actually going to provide with honest feedback, and you know where you have to deploy the resources to address the shortcomings. So there's many examples that I can give that are like that, but I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a taste of what a real effective talent strategy encompasses, right? It's not just, okay, we're going to put up job openings and hope people respond. No, there's much more to it than that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And thank you for the taste. And we can have people listen to this, and there's a lot more information available out there. But I think fundamentally, it's really important to have a strategy behind it. You can't wait until you just need a filled job. You can't wait until somebody leaves. You have to have an ongoing strategy that's constantly worked at. And having HR have a seat at the table. They need to be in the room to help make some of those decisions. So I completely agree. Those are great points. So Alex, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the MHEDA Talks podcast, but we have something called a lightning round, and you have made it to our lightning round. Fantastic. Are you ready to enter the lightning round?
I am ready. Let's go.
All right, let's go. If you could have any animal as a pet, regardless of practicality, what would it be?
Oh, something flying for sure, because I'd love to be able to fly around. Well, regardless of practicality, I'll say dragon. I mean, can't get away from Why not? Go.
What is the most underrated skill in today's job market?
There's so many good answers to this question, but I think the most underrated skill is the ability to effectively network. Like, if you can build those connections, my God, that has such a force multiplier effect for you later on in your career. I mean, I've now been doing this for more than 20 years, and I can tell you, it very much is about who you know and much less about what you know. So I would say for any young people listening, get out there, network with people, meet them, let them get to know you a little bit. And who knows what's going to happen as a result down the road, but it's going to be a good thing.
I love that answer. Would you rather live in a world where you can dance instead of walk or sing instead of talk?
Like I would only get to do one of those things. Okay.
Yeah. Instead of walking, you'd be dancing, or instead of talking, you would have to sing.
Oh man, imagine a world where everyone just sings to each other. Yeah, I'll pick that one. I would say sing instead of talk.
All right. If you could swap jobs with anybody for one day, who would it be?
When I was younger, I actually went into college wanting to be an emergency room surgeon. I went at the pre-med, and that job is so demanding, but also it has to be so gratifying. I mean, you're saving people's lives every day. So if I could just absorb all the knowledge and become a surgeon for a day, that's what I would do.
Awesome. There's probably a lot here, but what is the most ridiculous fact that you know? Like, as a data person, you have to have so many.
Oh my gosh. I know so many ridiculous facts. Oh man. What is the most ridiculous fact that I know? The options are just so numerous. I'm trying to kind of sort through those options. Most ridiculous fact. I'm gonna have to say it's got to deal with this concept of Dyson spheres. I don't know if you know what a Dyson sphere is. There's this phenomenon in astrophysics that basically says that we are able to look for the existence of intelligent life in the universe by observing stars and the infrared energy they're emitting, because any advanced civilization is going to build up a whole host of bodies around their sun to use as an energy source. And so if we look at space in a specific way, then we'll be able to identify where there's likely to be intelligent life by looking at this infrared signature of Dyson spheres. And very recently, they've actually done a study that shows that within 1,000 light years of Earth, there's 7 stars that we cannot explain why they have this infrared signature that they're emitting on the radiation spectrum. And until we can answer that question, and there are other possibilities, but until we can answer that question, it is a possibility that there are intelligent civilizations operating around those stars. So that's a good example. Yeah.
All right. If you could have a lifetime supply of one thing, what would it be?
A lifetime supply of one thing. Oh, my kids' laughter.
No, I love that. All right. Would you rather have the ability to fly, but only at walking speed, or the ability to run, but at super speed and only on your hands?
That was it. That was the killer. The only on your hands is a quick eliminator for me. I will fly at walking speed over running on my hands any day.
I have a 12-year-old daughter who helps me come up with some of these questions.
That's amazing.
If you could use only one emoji for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, I know this. I don't even have to think about this one. It's my favorite emoji that exists out there. It's that smiley face that, like, it has one eye closed and that one. That's my favorite emoji. I use it excessively, probably too much, but particularly with my children. So that's the one that I would default to.
And finally, what inspires you the most?
I think that what inspires me the most is that we live in a country where the opportunity to become your very best is really available to us. most people don't know this, but I was born in Kiev, Ukraine. I emigrated to the US when I was 10 years old. And especially in light of what's going on over there right now with the war, brought about by Russia, we take so many things for granted here. So I draw an amazing amount of inspiration from the fact that I get to live in a free country where I truly get to make my own choices and become what I want to be, that my kids get to do the same thing, that I can encourage and support my wife to do the same thing. And so I think that an attitude of gratitude for the little things in life is a true source of inspiration for me. And I feel compelled to do this because when my parents decided to leave the Soviet Union, they were basically in their mid-30s. They had two small children, myself at 10 and my brother at 3. And they made the decision to leave everything they knew, everything that they earned up until that point in life, and to go out to give us that opportunity. And that's such an amazing thing. I don't think I could do that right now, honestly. Like if I were to have to start all over somewhere where I don't speak the language and have no idea how I'm going to earn a living or anything like that. So I would say the opportunity that America presents is an inspiration to me. And I try to espouse that as often as I can to remind people that, yeah, we have our problems and there's obviously huge challenges that we're going to have to overcome, but we have the creativity, we have the will, and we have the determination to do that as we have in the past. So I'm very optimistic on our future, and I take a lot of inspiration from that.
Well, I cannot think of a better place to end this podcast. So you officially made it through the lightning round. Thank you so much, Alex. I know it was tricky, got a little dicey, but I really appreciate it. I could talk all day. It's so interesting and fascinating, how you approach it, and from a data perspective that you can rely on, and it's not just hyperbole or opinion. And I think we're missing some of that in the world today, especially with things that we see and listen to. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and if I may, Shari, I just want to give a huge shout out to Katie Richards. I know that Katie has been recently involved in a very difficult accident, and she's recovering nicely. But I just want to say, hi, Katie. We're all thinking of you, and we're sending absolute positive energy your way. So get back to full health as quickly as you can, and I can't wait to see you again soon.
Oh, I love that. We all are wishing Katie the best, and know she'll pull through this and end up really good on the other side. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I hope so.